Here with us today to do the final keynote that won't disappoint, no pressure. Welcome, Tom Fishburne.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. It's always a tough spot to be at the end of a conference like this, right before the weekend. But I have one thing going for me, and that's that we're mostly going to be looking at cartoons. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about the mindset I think that we need to have in marketing and sales to really take full advantage of all the amazing technology that you guys have been hearing about for the last day and a half. This is really an exciting, I have the slide advancing here, but it's not going on the overhead. So while that's going up, I just want to talk about it's an amazing time to work in marketing and sales. And so for those of you who have been part of the journey, there's an incredible array of new technologies coming along all the time. And it's incredibly exciting. But I think sometimes what gets missed is the mindset that we need to have to take full advantage of that technology. And that's the main thing I want to talk about today. I feel like a lot of conversations are sounding a bit like this. What's the big campaign idea? We're going digital, Facebook, YouTube, a mobile app, Pinterest. What are we going to do in all those channels? I don't know. We'll figure it out later. And it's that I'll figure it out later that I think can sometimes get us in trouble. We get really excited about the shiny new thing. And then I feel like in some ways we're in this awkward adolescent stage of digital marketing and digital tools where you have billboard ads that look a little bit like this. This subway has no internet access, but that won't stop us from asking you to scan the QR code in this ad. Or if you've ever seen the QR code on a billboard on the side of the highway, right? Or on the side of a moving bus going down the street, is if somebody's going to take out their phone and follow the bus and like somehow scan it and then look at their phone, and likely it will take them to a website that's not optimized for mobile. Like, I feel like that's a little bit of the world that we're in right now, where these tools are coming along. It's really exciting. Marketing and sales folks are jumping on the bandwagon, but if you don't get the mindset right, you have a misfire. And the same thing is true, I think, with data. Let's solve this problem using the big data none of us have the slightest idea what to do with. Here's a chart, sales, shaved heads. We found a correlation in the data. Everyone take a razor. There's this poor guy sleeping, his phone's starting to vibrate. Vibrating again, kind of wakes him up. Having trouble sleeping? $5 off nighttime sleep aid liquid caps. I think my Nest smoke alarm is going off. Google AdWords just pitched me a fire extinguisher and an offer for temporary housing. And then we're all trying to optimize the funnel, do whatever drives the most traffic, like listicles about cats. Relentlessly harass them with marketing automation, trick them with a bait and switch offer, and then hope they promote your brand to all their friends. So these tools are coming along, but we're having these disconnects. Sometimes we use technology as a crutch, thinking that you can get people to engage with your brand just by being a part of these platforms, and it can be a real disconnect. And at the same time, our customers' expectations have never been higher. You have this poor guy, he's in an airport, all of the flights have been canceled. Honey, just be patient. The hotel brand I'm loyal to isn't optimized for mobile. Honey? Honey? She said to say she left you for another brand. And this was inspired by something that Google put out last year I found really interesting, that people are more loyal to the moment than they are to any particular brand. And I found that such a revelation as somebody brought up in marketing, this whole concept of that. Because I was brought in the school that you could cultivate loyalty beyond reason. All your job as a marketer, if you could get your customers so loyal to your brand, they'd follow you anywhere. But the rules are really changing. And that's a challenging and scary place to be, but it's also really exciting if you can think about what these moments that matter really are for your customers. Google calls these micro moments. And the idea of thinking about micro moments that matter for your customers, I think, is a really interesting place to start on how you can take advantage of some of these tools. So here's an example of a brand, Red Roof Inn. They're one of the smaller hotel chains out there. And they really started to think about these micro moments that matter as a way for them to punch harder than their weight. They knew that they couldn't afford to try to out Starwood, for instance. One of the ways that they do their marketing is through search engine optimization. Hotels bid on all the same keywords. It's incredibly expensive. These guys don't have nearly the deep pockets. but they started to think about what insights could they glean from data and how could they use technology to connect with audiences in a different way than Star would do it. They started to think about what micro moments mattered for them. And the one that they came up with was exactly what I illustrated in that cartoon. Red roof inns tend to be near airports. Flights are canceled all the time. And they thought, let's focus on that micro moment. Somebody's stuck in an airport and their flights have been canceled. They didn't know they'd have to spend the night, and now they do. And so they decided to look at the data and actually develop an algorithm that let them bid on keywords only in areas where flights had been canceled and the weather data showed that there were a lot of storms. And then they basically created these geo-targeted ads that were creatively optimized in real time. Flight canceled, Red Roof has you covered with rooms only 3 miles away. And instead of trying to bid against every keyword that Starwood was, they were able to think about it a little bit differently and use some of these tools to directly connect with an audience in a way that mattered to them. And it spiked their online sales and room reservations by over 250% and made a real impact on who they are as a brand. And I love this example because it's something that's available to everyone in marketing and sales. It just requires a different kind of mindset. Bigger brands can do this too, but when you're a small brand, I think it's particularly important to punch harder than your weight and to use some of these tools to kind of tip the playing field. This is an example of one of those micro moments. The pair of consumers there surrounded by paid media, by bigger budget brands, and he's saying, I'll have what she's having. And that's the type of moment that I think is possible if you think about it along the lines of this mindset. So today I want to talk about 5 aspects of what I think go into that mindset change. And I'm going to talk about those using cartoons and case studies, hopefully by a lot of brands you may not be familiar with. A lot of them may be in the consumer marketing space, but I think the lessons are relevant for B2B marketing. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun talking through it. But I want to start with a caption contest. I'm curious how many of you saw this ahead of time. We ran a little caption contest online leading up to it. Great, a lot of you. Perfect. So this is an example of how mindset can affect a situation. You have one image, and different people can look at it very, very differently. So I wanted to share 5 of our favorites that came through. I'll start with 2 honorable mentions, and then we have 3 winners that we're giving a signed print to. So here's a standard situation. Budget cuts will be a bit more drastic this year. Since my marketing budget has been sliced in half, let me show you how a sales rep performs when he gets sliced in half. And here are the 3 winners. Great pitch. That's perfect for our next campaign. Does anyone else know you're here? Interrupt me one more time, Tom. I dare you. I double dare you. I'm done trying to finesse the glass ceiling, going to try a more direct approach now. So a round of applause for if any of you are in the room. Great stuff. And I thought I would just share just a quick sidebar in my background, because I do have an unusual background for a cartoonist. My background's in marketing, but I've drawn cartoons since I was a little kid doing this. How many of you have ever worked with Silly Putty? Yeah, that was my introduction, lying on the floor, kind of sitting on the floor, transferring cartoons over to a fresh sheet of paper, and then changing the dialogue to be about my brothers, to basically make fun of them. That was my initial introduction. These guys were my heroes growing up. That's Bill Watterson on the left from Calvin and Hobbes, Gary Larson from the far side, and Berkeley Breathed from Bloom County on the right. They were my heroes growing up. They all quit cartooning the year that I went to college, which was a sign to me that there probably wasn't a likelihood I'd end up as a cartoonist in my future career, but go figure. And interestingly, they've all stayed in retirement except for Berkeley Breathed, who came out of retirement when Donald Trump announced he was running for president, and now he's purely online. But that got me back into cartoons eventually. I started drawing cartoons in Harvard Business School. I had a student strip there for the 2 years that I was there. And then it basically followed along my marketing career for a while. I worked in consumer products at General Mills, at Nestle, and then I spent 5 years at Method. I was the interim chief marketing officer for a tech company called Hotel Tonight. And all along, my marketing cartoons kind of followed that career. I basically started emailing out 1 a week to friends, and it's now 100,000 people a week who get this. And it allowed my wife and I to start a business around this 7 years ago, where we have a bunch of cartoonists in a studio, and we create storytelling using cartoons. But I give that sidebar because it's helped shape a little bit of my thinking on marketing, both as a cartoonist and as a marketer. And I'm going to walk through these 5 examples of this mindset change that are kind of inspired by both. So the first idea I want to share with you is the idea that Don Draper is no longer in charge. As sad as I was, as anyone who works anywhere in your marketing, it's sad that Mad Men is off the air. But the first brand I worked on after business school was General Mills. It was one of those brands, from one of those top icons of the last century of advertising. And I found it really interesting working on a brand like that. I arrived at my desk the first day. I found all these binders of how you do marketing for a brand like that. I literally found a creative brief written by a young Leo Burnett. And it was fascinating to me to see what they thought about marketing in that era, how they thought about marketing, and actually how many of the assumptions that went into that really hadn't changed in how we were thinking about marketing. And one of those dominant assumptions was that you had a captive audience. Back in the early days, you had just a few channels to get your marketing message out into the world. There were only 3 television stations. And so this assumption was that you could adopt this command and control style of marketing where you control the message all the way through. This is what Seth Godin refers to as the TV industrial complex. You basically have this simple model where you refine your single-minded proposition, and then you just repeat your message over and over and over again, and people respond to it. And that worked for a period of time, but the challenge is we're now in a world like this, your ad ignored here, where just as we've never had more exciting tools as people working in marketing and sales to connect with their audiences, it's never been easier for our customers to tune out anything we actually want to say to them. Right? There's no such thing as a captive audience any longer. I read that the average consumer has a lower attention span than a goldfish. Sorry, did you say something? This pair is so perfect. I can't wait to buy them cheaper online somewhere. What's your Wi-Fi password? You don't even have a captive audience when they're literally in your store. And this is causing a real panic for marketers. How do you connect with an audience that doesn't want to connect with you? We learn to speak your language, so your generation will start to pay attention to our ads. And they respond with a middle finger. And the bigger lesson and the trick is that we're now in a world that looks much more like this, right? All these different nodes and touch points are ways that people discover your brand. They're customers that interact with you on their customer journey. And you don't control all those nodes and touch points the same way that you did back in the Don Draper era. Don Draper doesn't know how to thrive in a world like that. And that's a real shift, and some brands are having a struggle trying to evolve in this new world. Here's a brand that a lot of people love, Nutella. This guy really loves Nutella. There's a woman in Italy who loved Nutella so much that on her own she started World Nutella Day. She set up a whole campaign around it. She asked people to send in pictures of themselves, like this guy kissing this big tub of Nutella. She asked people to send in recipes and collected over 1,000 recipes. What do you think the parent company of Nutella did when they found out about her? Yeah, they sent her a cease and desist letter. Using the wrong brand font, not the right permission on how you talk about our brand, all the typical stuff that's this reflexive reaction on losing control of how your brand is talked about kind of in the market. And what a missed opportunity, right? They eventually went back trying to warm things up, but it was too late. But that's, I think, a reflexive reaction that a lot of brands are really struggling with in how marketing operates now. I support word-of-mouth marketing just as long as we tightly control exactly what they say. And that's the default reaction, this command and control response. Here's another example of a brand campaign. How many of you have been to the state of Kentucky? So a few of you. So every state in the US has a tourism department. They want more of you to visit their states. So Kentucky wants you to come to their state. They invested a lot of money in a brand campaign to define what the state of Kentucky stands for. They came up with this platform, Unbridled Spirit. And they went around talking about how they represent unbridled spirit. They tried to get people to talk about it. They tried to get people engaged and didn't really get much of a reaction. And then along come these two guys. So these two guys happen to work in advertising. They happen to be from the state of Kentucky. They thought that unbridled spirit was kind of lame. If you Google unbridled spirit, you get a horse ranch in Texas. So they decided, these two guys, on their own, that they are going to rebrand the state of Kentucky. So they decide, working in advertising, it needed a different platform. So they came up with one they liked a lot better. And they did their own road show. and decided to drive around the state of Kentucky interviewing people about Kentucky. And they got all these definitions of what Kentucky means to them. This guy in the bottom right, his job title is Turtle Man. Not sure exactly what that means, but he defined what the state of Kentucky meant for him. And these two guys also started to create media. In Kentucky, there are more barrels of bourbon than there are people. And they're doing this entirely on their own for fun just because they love the state of Kentucky. But what do you think the official tourism department of the state of Kentucky thought about this, right? They issued a statement. We certainly would not sanction or endorse that phraseology. These guys are Kentucky natives and they love the state, but they have a different constituency, which is no one. Right? The internet loves statements like that. And so these guys just went on there, kept running with it. They issued their own statement. Regardless of what Kentucky's tourism department says, we're rebranding the state. A grassroots movement has taken place, driven by proud Kentuckians, the internet's plural, and a little social media. And you know, which one do you think is going to resonate more, right? These guys ended up getting talked about in Conan O'Brien's opening monologue, right? It's all driving attention to the state of Kentucky. And I think it's a reflection of this mindset change that's happening, that's making a lot of brands uncomfortable. How do you operate in a world with guys like that, right? It can be a real force for good for your brand, but you can't possibly control it. And it's not, it's also a threatening idea to think about the total anarchy that could result if you just give away the keys to your brand to anyone. We crowdsourced our financial services ad on the internet. Sooner or later, everything turns into a cat on the internet. Hasbro had a contest to pick the next Monopoly piece, and surprise, surprise, the internet picked a cat, right? You probably remember in England when the British government decided to have a poll to name this scientific vessel that was very serious. And yeah, Bodie McBoatface was the name that the internet picked. Yeah, they are. They're still voting on it. Justin Bieber's tour manager had a poll to pick Justin Bieber's next tour location, and the internet picked North Korea. So it's a scary bit of anarchy, and how do you operate in that world when you're a brand owner? It can be a little bit threatening. But I think what it means fundamentally is that we have to ask if our marketing is really worth sharing. Do we understand that what we're putting out into the world, there's a balance of power shift? And ultimately, the question is, are you creating things that are going to make people excited about your brand? And that's an uncomfortable place, and it's not easy, but it's a reflection of the mindset change I think that we're going through. The second idea I want to share is this idea that technology can't save boring marketing. It can amplify remarkable marketing, and it can extend, it can make everything that we do more powerful, but it's a dangerous idea to think of it as a crutch. We need to stay focused on our marketing priorities and not get distracted by every shiny new, look, squirrel. And I feel like this is a tempting place for marketers to be. It can often sound a bit like this. So your marketing plan to sell more soup is live streaming virtual reality 3D printing wearable drones? Maybe we shouldn't have scheduled this meeting right after South by Southwest. They haven't liked, friended, followed, fanned, shared, or plussed us, but maybe, just maybe, they'll pin us. And so I feel like every time something new comes along, we get really excited about it. I want to share an example of a marketing campaign that I love because it is decidedly very low tech, but it exactly has that mindset that I'm talking about, that when you then add marketing tools to it, it makes it even more effective. So I had the chance a few years ago to move to England to help take the Method brand to Europe. And I did what a lot of you do when you travel. I wanted to see how marketing looked like in other countries. And I came across this little smoothie brand called Innocent. Curious how many of you have ever seen Innocent. So a couple of you. It's basically like the Nantucket Nectars of the UK. When I came across them, they were still pretty small, but they were starting to get shelf space. And I was amazed as a marketer looking at this that all the bottles were wearing little hats. And I thought, gosh, how do they, what is that all about? And I realized that it was part of a promotion that they were giving smoothies away at full price, but for every bottle you get a little hat. And then 25p would go to this organization called Age UK that provided heating oil for the elderly in the winter. So this wonderful cause marketing event. And I thought, that's just such a cool idea. You're not just discounting your product, you're actually telling a marketing story, but it's effectively a sales trade promotion. But I was wondering, where did they get all the hats? Because on the shelves, they were all very different. They're all different shapes and sizes. I had all different little inside jokes as part of them. And I learned that the hats were actually knitted by their own consumers. And it blew me away, particularly because I thought as a marketer, I was trying to drive engagement. I was trying to get people just to click on a link in a newsletter. And my activation rates were often pretty low. And this brand was somehow getting people to break out knitting needles and to knit hats, which were arriving by the truckload into their store. And I realized that it was the power of this amazing idea. They got people so excited about this promotion, this idea of doing something good in this quirky campaign, and this insight around the people that they were attracting and connecting with as a brand owner, that this is literally in their offices, these hats were arriving by the truckload. And as a small brand, they were suddenly, this was a big moment for them. They suddenly got talked about. And ultimately, which bottle would you pick up in the store? The backstory on this is that they were a smaller brand. Bigger brands wanted their space. Coca-Cola or Pepsi in particular wanted their space and had started a buy one, get one free sort of trade war type of pricing strategy that these guys couldn't possibly compete against. So instead, they used insights about their audience, and they developed this amazingly engaging campaign. You couldn't get more low tech if you tried. You have knitting and you have the elderly, right? But the most amazing thing about this is that they first did this campaign with nothing more sophisticated than an email newsletter. But they somehow drove that level of engagement. And that, I think, is another part of this mindset. They had that the big idea that they had was engaging from the start. And then over time, as they laddered on other ways to talk about the idea, it grew even stronger. They realized that this promotion, the lift of selling these bottles was higher than if they had just given the money off its shelf. And I think that's a really interesting reflection of this mindset change. But it's incredible. This thing is so Pinterest ready, even before Pinterest debuted. But when it came along, it was just something that they could continue to build on and get people excited about. And over time, they've now had millions of these hats knitted. They've given away a ton of money to different charities. Ultimately, Coca-Cola bought this brand in the UK because of how well they were able to compete against bigger brands like Pepsi. And now they're the #1 smoothie brand all across Europe through quirky ideas like this that are decided, many of them at the heart may not be you might not think of them as digital campaigns, but when digital campaigns became more and more available, they were able to build on it because they had this remarkable idea. And it reflects, I think, something that I've heard kind of talked about last year from the Diageo CEO, that it's not about doing digital marketing, it's about marketing effectively in a digital world and shifting away from that shiny new thing approach that can sometimes be a little bit of a distraction. Okay, third idea I want to share is the idea that the best marketing doesn't feel like marketing. Right? We all know what it's like to be the recipient of marketing, right? We all in this room wear different hats, marketing hats, sales hats, but we're also all customer hats. We know what it feels like to be marketed to. Careful, that last content was full of marketing. and that can often get in the way of our best communication. I have new baby pics to share. I just got back from my reunion. Did you know that we have 7 subs under 6 grams of fat? If you're going to crash our news feed, at least make it interesting. We finally found a way to get people to engage with our content. And so often what we create feels like marketing. And I think that there's a shift that needs to happen then too. So here's an example of a new technology that comes along. This is a robot called Chalkbot, which is capable of spraying a road surface with any message you want, right? This is a pretty exciting thing, from a marketing and sales standpoint. You literally have no limitations. You could drive around the road and say anything you wanted about your company. So Nike came across Chalkbot, and they decided to approach it a little bit differently. They rigged it up so that they could collect messages of cancer support, and then they would spray a road surface, take a picture, and then send a picture back to whoever provided that message of cancer support as this physical artifact of this message in the real world. Incredibly engaging sort of way to talk to an audience that's ultimately not about the shoe. And then they sent it to the Tour de France, and the entire route of the Tour de France was covered with these messages. There's no Nike swoosh hit in here, although you could use Chalkbot if they wanted to draw the world's largest Nike swoosh. But yet it's incredibly engaging. I mean, think about how you would feel about Nike if you were part of this in any way, whether you were providing a message or just curious about what these messages stood for. And I think it reflects this mindset change, that it's not about the shoe, it's not about the bike, it's about you, this end audience, as that filter mechanism. And that, I think, can apply to any type of digital tool that comes along and prevent us from sounding a bit like this, how brands typically sound. But enough about me. What about you? What do you think of me? That is usually the default position. We, as working in marketing sales, we often think that our customers are thinking about our brand as often as we are. And if you were somehow able to scan their brain profile, you'd see my husband, my kids, friends. I don't see our brand of pickle relish anywhere. But this is a brand loyalist, and I think it's an important shift when something new comes along to think not how are we going to use this technology through our prism, but instead how are we going to use it through the prism of our audience. Vine is something, as an example, a few years ago when it came along, it really challenged marketers to think what you would say in 6 seconds, right? And then in the 5th second, we'd like to add a pack shot, show a product demo, and tag a local retail promotion, right? Vine is no longer around, but interestingly enough, 6-second videos are becoming more and more the format. And the answer is not to take a 30-second spot and shove it into 6 seconds, right? What do you do in 6 seconds that's truly saying something about your brand? An example of a brand I think really thought about this in an interesting way is Lowe's, the do-it-yourself retailer. Rather than just do a typical ad, they thought about a whole series of things that they could do to instruct people on how to take care of their homes better. They call it the Fix It in 6 series. So that if you have a screw that's stripped, you can use a rubber band to take the screw out. Has nothing to do with Lowe's per se, except that they are coming across as a thought leader that's truly useful to this audience they're trying to reach. If you have scratches in your wood floor, you can use walnuts. You can use cooking oil to make snow shovels a little bit slippier. If you have a water stain on a wood table, you can use real mayonnaise and leave it and then wipe it away. Lowe's does not sell mayonnaise, right? But they're using something that comes along in a way that's how can they be truly useful to this audience that they're trying to reach. And ultimately, they made it crowdsourced and a big part of who they are as a brand. Okay, the 4th idea I want to share is that the idea that data-driven doesn't mean data-blinded. We're data-driven marketers, and the GPS doesn't say anything about a detour. Data is an incredibly exciting evolution for anyone working in marketing and sales. When I started working in marketing, I was instructed that I was able to own a P&L, and I got really excited about this. You have full accountability for this P&L. Great, where are my controls? You control that one lever. If revenue drops, pull it. What does it do? It cuts your marketing budget. And so as data comes along, it gives us more levers to pull. It prevents moments like this. It's a simple question: was our marketing campaign profitable or not? You can have a seat at the table as soon as you can back up your marketing ideas with data. And so as a marketer, I went through a little bit of an evolution of my own, the 5 stages of grief, denial, data, schmata, anger, analytics as the death of creativity, bargaining, can't we just tweak the model to get a different result? Depression, since when did marketing require so much math? And acceptance, I accept data that supports whatever I plan to do already. And so I've been on my own evolution, kind of thinking about data, but I think where we are now, we really have to question the data. We have more data than ever before, but as the theme of this conference tells us, it's more about the insights than the data. We have to push back and question the data that we've received. Are the digital ads we buy actually being seen? Absolutely. Almost half the time. At least 50% of the pixels for a whole second. Hopefully by a human. Maybe on a site without porn. But there's no way to verify that. That explains the low CPM. Yes, it's a great deal. Here's a guy getting a catalog in the mail he's seeing a shoe. He sees the shoe on the billboard. He sees it on a display ad. He hears it on the radio. He sees it on a TV ad. He buys it using his mobile phone. Based on the data, we should move 100% of our spending to mobile. And that's, I think, where we are today, is thinking about the data that we're receiving and how do we really translate that into insights. Specifically with last click attribution, that's a big topic right now. Right? And it's something that a lot of marketers and sales folks are trying to get their minds around. I know it's been one of the topics in the conference so far. Ford Canada made a lot of evolution in the last year in thinking about how they model their attribution for all their different marketing activities. They used to give a disproportionate level of their spending toward keyword buying because that was often where people were at the last stage. And as they tried to think about what the awareness tactics, the impact that those had on whether you buy the car, ultimately it really transformed it when they were able to look at the full customer purchase journey and end up realizing that a lot of their display tactics, their video tactics, other things were a big part of people's ultimate decision to buy the cars. Ultimately, going through this process ended up dropping their cost per acquisition by 25% and had a major shift on how they market their cars and thinking about it. But it requires us as marketers to be more data-driven, but to also be really, really thoughtful about how we think about the data that we're exposed to and how we apply it ultimately to be more effective in what we do. Okay, last idea I want to share with you is the idea that usage is like oxygen for ideas. So the other aspect of this mindset change is that we need to always be testing and learning from live in-market examples about what ultimately resonates for the audiences that we're trying to reach. And that expression comes from something I heard from the founder of WordPress that I really liked, that usage is like oxygen for ideas. You can never fully anticipate how an audience is going to react to something you've created until it's out there. That means every moment you're working on something without it being in the public, it's actually dying, deprived of the oxygen of the real world. And so I think insights come from oxygen of the real world. And that's a real shift from how marketing is often operated, where it's often in silos separate from that. Oh, all-knowing focus group, tell me your unmet consumer needs so that we can create disruptive innovations for you. More promotions, yeah, make everything cheaper. We finally got through all the market research required to launch our new product, but we're retired now. We're having a focus group to test which questions to ask in our next focus group. So I want to share an example of one of my favorite brands that I think is really embracing this. This is a San Francisco company called Beta Brand. How many of you know of Beta Brand? So quite a few of you. They're doing amazing things. If you're not familiar with them, it's definitely worth checking out. They're basically a clothing brand that competes against Gap and J. Crew and bigger fashion brands, but they want to do it in a very different way. It's embedded in their name, Beta Brand. They're always learning about what resonates. Their marketing proposition they describe as new ideas nonstop. They started out launching at least one new product every week on day one, and they would do it basically often before they really had inventory built up because they could make stuff really quickly by manufacturing in San Francisco. And so as a brand, their idea was, we're going to try to test and learn, figure out what works all the time, use data to refine and build on the ideas that work and shelve the ideas that don't. This is one of their first big breakthrough hits. It's called the Gluttony Pants. It has extra buttons to make more room for your meal. That did well, so they decided to launch an article of clothing for each of the 7 deadly sins. This is a lust skirt made out of disco ball material. My favorite example were the Envy Pants. They made only one pair, and they sold it on eBay on auction model. The winner was able to be the envy of all of his friends. And so over time, this little brand is starting to get talked about based on these clothes that get people to relate to them. They're learning in real time. This is the Caperin. Some of these were more effective than others. These are bicycle pants that have basically reflective mud flaps in your back pockets, so when you're cycling, you can be a little bit safer. When Mark Zuckerberg did his roadshow wearing a hoodie, these guys decided to launch the executive hoodie. This dress looks pretty innocuous until you zoom up and realize it's the poo emoji from your phone. And so all of these things, they're learning what works in real time. These things never would have passed the typical focus group environment of the Mad Men era. But they're learning right away from what people are actually relating to. And as a result, they're making a lot of traction. But they're testing everything. They even tested literally the length of the beard for the model in an ad like this to see what would be more effective and to see which would drive the most click-through rates. Everything is driven by data. And as a result, this little brand is able to compete against bigger brands like Gap and J. Crew and now have like $30 to $40 million in sales in a store in the Mission and growing retail presence because of how they use data. But ultimately, they realized the biggest reflection was how people were responding to their brand, the insights around how people wear their brand and get excited about their brands. They rigged it up eventually so that people could send in pictures of themselves. They would get a discount of their clothes, but they would also get a dedicated URL that looked like that they were the model of this weird clothing company out in California. And suddenly all of their marketing came on the backs of people sharing pictures of themselves wearing Red Devil smoking jackets to get people talking about their brand and what they resonate with. And since then, they've started to evolve it even further. Now a lot of the ideas are crowdsourced. And as a result, this brand is using data and insights from its customers to create this real connection and allow them to ultimately punch a lot harder than their weight. This guy is skydiving into Burning Man, which is pretty amazing, but he's doing it wearing these pants made out of disco ball material. And Beta brand is being talked about at every step of the chain. But ultimately, it's not just about the clothes and the features and the benefits. It's about what this guy wants to say about this company because of what it says about himself. And I think that's the main image I want to leave with you today, is that when you think about connecting with your customers, this type of moment is ultimately what you can get to now more than ever before because of the tools that are at our disposal and the insights that we can have with our audiences. I've really enjoyed spending time with you. Full Circle was nice enough to order a bunch of books, so I'll be out there right after the talk. If anybody would like any, they're for you at the table. And I just want to thank you again for having me. It's been great to be here.